Hello, and welcome to another live on White Davy Gardening and Run Farm. Before we go any further, I must apologize. It's going to be a bit noisy because there is some work going on in my winery. Hi, Cian. Hi, Han White. Thank you for joining me. So today we're going to be discussing 14 mistakes that beginner gardeners make. I'm doing okay, and you? You're doing well. That is good. Okay, so really, there are far more than 14 mistakes that beginner gardeners make, but I'm just going to be discussing the most critical ones. At least from my point of view, these are some of the most critical mistakes that beginner gardeners can make. And the first one is starting their garden too big. And the reason that can be a problem is that if you are not experienced with gardening, you're gonna require a lot of time to learn about the plants that you're growing, what type of care they need, and things like that. Maintaining your garden might become a challenge if your garden is too big because you're not really used to gardening. So, starting off small and gradually improving as you go is the best way that you can start off as a beginner garden. In your gardening experience, what mistake have you made when you first started out? A mistake that I made when I was starting out is overwatering. As a youngster, you know how you are when you're kids, and that's when I started planting when I was pretty young. Enjoyed planting some. In fact, I can actually remember my first plant when I was a kid, about 7, and I planted red kidney beans. And oh, did I ever overwater? That sounds great. Oh, thank you, Ann White. I think mine was planting too much in a small space. Okay. Yes, and that is one of the points that are one of the 14 points that I am going to be discussing. So, starting off too big is one of the first mistakes that people make when they are beginner gardeners. And this one is also critical, planting your stuff too deep or too shallow. Some plants need to be planted deeper than others. So you have to know your plant requirements. And if you're starting from seeds, then the package usually tells you how deep or how shallow to plant that particular seed. And if you are planting from seeds but you do not have instructions on how to plant, the rule of the thumb is whatever the thickness of your seed, then that is how deep you bury your seeds. So the width of your seeds or the thickness of your seeds, that is how deep you are going to be burying your seeds. And the reason you don't want to go too deep is because the plants are very young and delicate when they are breaking out of the seeds. They just have enough nutrients just to get them to push themselves out of the soil and try to develop their solid roots. If you have them too deep, they don't have enough energy. Hi, Geothy. Hi, Hair Healthy Home. How are you guys doing? Right, so if you plant your seeds too deep, then they won't have enough energy to push themselves out of the soil, which is one of the reasons why your soil has to be thin or loose. Yes, so don't plant it too deep, and you don't want to plant it too shallow either, because then the plant will not be able to develop a proper root system. So, fine. Thank you for the live visit. Oh, you're welcome, my dear. No problem. Right, so you don't want to plant it too shallow either, because you want your plant to develop the proper root system, and it cannot do that if it is too shallow. Not to mention that any little change in wind and stuff like that can turn over your plant. So you want to make sure that you plant it at the proper depth. Okay, so the third mistake that gardeners make is overwatering or underwatering. Constantly we hear of overwatering, and sometimes because of that you might be fearful of overwatering your plants, and as a result you will end up underwatering it. So when you have your plants, what you can do when you're planting, you want to make sure that your soil is thoroughly watered, and then you're going to make sure that that soil stays moist, because if it is not moist, your plant or your seeds are going to die. Especially if it is a seed, it is definitely going to die. If it once it you wet it, it starts the germinating process. Once it dries out, it's going to kill the seeds and it won't be able to grow. So you want to make sure that you don't have too much water, you don't have too little water. How can you test your soil to know if there is too much water in the soil? Half an inch to an 1 inch, you find that your soil is dry, then you need to moisten it. If it is too dry that it goes beyond that point, beyond an inch, and it is still dry, then you need to give it a good watering. You don't want to overwater though, because overwatering your plants can cause your plants to have root rot, especially when it is in the seedling stage. But even after the seedling stage, it can root rot. So you want to be careful of how much water you give your plants. Um, Overwatering. Yes, so you want to be careful of how much water you give your plants. And there are some plants, like the herbs, that like loose drained soil. They don't like a lot of water. So these plants, you're going to make sure that you give them one good watering once for the week. Or if you're going to be watering daily, just very lightly, just a light spray or mist, and that would be good enough. Okay, right. So once per week for plants that loves dry, loose soil. So your herbs usually fall into that category, your mints and stuff like that. There are some plants that like moderate amount of water. There are some plants that likes a lot of water. So you have to research your plant, know what is required so that you do not overwater or underwater your plant. Oh, thank you, Her Healthy Home. You're encouraging others to hit the like button. I take it that means that you are enjoying this discussion. Oh, that's good. Thanks, Jyoti. I pronounced your name right, Jyoti? Okay, so let's talk about the fourth mistake, which is either over fertilizing or under fertilizing your plants. Now, there are many types of fertilizers, and I'm going to be honest, I am not familiar with the vast majority of what is there. I've never used artificial fertilizers. I have initially, when I started using store-bought compost, I used like the sheep, the cow, or the goat manure. I've never used anything outside of that or organic material from my own garden. Hi, Harnav. How are you today? Right. So even though it is organic fertilizers or stuff like that, I'm not familiar with a lot of most of them because I don't use them. Growing up, I always hear stories about my grandfather's farm and his products. When they take it to the market, it didn't last long. The quick time he would be sold out and he's back home because his produce are always nice and big and healthy looking. So people always just go for his produce. And from what I hear, my grandfather has never bought any form of organic or artificial fertilizers. He just use whatever he gets from his garden, and that is how he grows all his plants. So because of that, I grew up with a love for gardening. That's where I got it from listening to stories about my grandfather's farm. And so growing up, I always tried to use the stuff around me to fertilize my plants. So we're discussing over fertilizing or under fertilizing. So if you have questions about type of fertilizers and stuff, I may not have the answers for them. Um, I compost the things that I have in my yard, in my garden, um, materials from the trees, apart from the tree barks or the tree trunks, sticks and stuff. I don't compost, but the leaves and stuff like that, and then whatever refuge I get, refuse I get from my garden, like the after harvesting, then the plant that remains, I will harvest that. I will compost that, and I will compost the food scraps from my kitchen. That, along with worm castings, is all I use on my plants, and I've had some pretty good harvests. Of course, you can use all these things and you still not have a good harvest because it's not just the nutrients that you feed your plants that will determine whether or not your plants do well. Temperature, moisture, wind. There are so many different things. Pollinations. There are so many different things that affects whether or not your plants do well. So really, it's not just about your fertilizer, but you want to make sure that you do your best, whatever it is. Harnov says he uses cow dung. Sian says, I watched your videos on how to care for herbs and now my herbs are growing beautifully. Oh, I'm very happy that I was able to help. That's pretty good. And she says, I only use food scraps, which I turn into compost. Yes, so all of those are very good materials to use in your garden. Um, Sometimes your garden you might think of using just compost and castings for your garden. You might wonder if you have to have soil in there. Yes, the answer is definitely yes. Doesn't have to be a lot if that's all you have, if you only have small amount of soil, but you need soil because of the trace minerals that are in it, as I mentioned, I think maybe in my previous live. So some plants are heavy feeders. I know things like corn, which is a member of the grass family. It is a heavy feeder on nitrogen. Some plants are heavy feeders on other stuff apart from nitrogen. So you have to know your plants, know what they prefer. For example, things like your herbs, yes, they do require some amount of compost, they require fertilizer on a whole, but because they like loose, well drained soil, compost is known to retain moisture in your soil. Now, if the compost is retaining moisture in your soil, it means that it can cause your herbs, like your thyme, to have too much moisture, which can cause your thyme to die or to have root rot. So you have to be careful. Know your plants, know what are heavy feeders, what are light feeders, what type of nutrients each plant requires. And a good idea is to, after figuring out the type of soil, the type of condition, the watering that your plants need, plants that have similar needs, plant those together. That way you don't have to be struggling going around picking in between plants to say, okay, had a lot here, had a little there. So if the plant is a heavy feeder, plant them all together. If they are light feeders, you plant those together, and that will make your gardening so much easier. Let's see. Geothy says, even me, sheep, goat, and cow dung manure I use. Excellent. I water my herbs once per week. Okay, yes. Um, and that takes us to the next mistake that gardeners make, which is planting too close. Now, we have small amount of space to grow in, and we want to get as much as we can out of our little space. And so sometimes we plant things closer than we should, even though sometimes we know we shouldn't plant them that close. But for beginners, they may not know that they cannot plant them that closely. And so what tends to happen when you plant too close is that, one, some plants are going to block the sun from others. Some are going to grow taller. They're going to be struggling for the sunlight, which is going to encourage them to be spiny or leggy. Two, it's going to encourage things like mildew on your plants. It is going to encourage pests on your plants. So you don't want to plant them too close. So it is recommended that you do a little research on what it is that you're planting and the space requirements that they have. So you can do square foot gardening, but square foot gardening depends on what you're planting. So there are some things that you can plant 16 plants within a 1 square foot. There are some plants that you can only put one in a square foot. In fact, there are some plants that you cannot even put one in a square foot because they require more space than that. So you have to know the plants that you're planning to grow and what amount of space each of them need. And as I mentioned in my previous live, if you don't have a lot of space and you want to plant more, go vertical. Grow your stuff vertically, and that will increase the amount of growing space that you have. And White says, nice tips. Planting things, planting things that are similar together. Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you, Han White. Okay, so we look at planting too closely. Now let's look at light requirements. Seedlings. This is a big issue for a lot of us, even for persons who have been gardening for years. Seedlings can be a problem. When we're starting our seedlings, some people cover their seedlings with so that it's dark to help the seeds to germinate. Some people will use light to germinate the seeds. Either method works. However, you want to ensure that once the seed germinate, the plant has sufficient light, or else it's going to cause your plants to be leggy because they're struggling to get as much light as they need. So you want to make sure that you have enough light. If you're using things like grow light, you need to have your lights 2 inches above the plant. And as the plant grow, you keep on moving the light, making sure that no matter how big your plant is, your light is 2 inches away from the plant. If you're planting plants that are not flowering, then you can use regular grow lights, not the blue light. If you have flowering plants, like for example your peppers, your tomatoes, and stuff like that, you have to use that blue light. So you have to know the type of plants to know the light required. So anything that is going to be producing fruits or is going to be flowering, those will require those blue grow lights. Don't remember the spectrum that is required for your grow lights, Some people use regular lights for plants like their lettuce and stuff like that that are not flowering. And let's say you are planting outdoors, so you're not having a seedling trees, or even if you're having a seedling tree outdoors, you still need to be conscious of light, because some plants don't like a lot of light. Some plants love the light. Some plants require shades. Um, so you have to know the plants, as I mentioned before. Know their plants. So do a little research. It doesn't really take much to do research on what you're growing. So do a little research on what you're growing and know what requires a lot of light, what requires a limited amount of light. And one of the things that I have been doing this year with my garden is constantly when I'm in my garden, I'm taking note of what part of my garden is getting a lot of sun at a particular time of day, what part is getting sun all throughout the day, what part of my garden is cooler, what part of my garden is on the warmer side. And then as I do that, I am preparing myself for gardening next year. And then I know that, okay, if this side of my garden is the cooler side, then what I'm going to be doing is planting the cool weather crops, or the crops that does not like a lot of sunlight, over on that side. If I know that this side get a lot of sun, then the plants that love sun is going to go there. So I'm constantly looking at my garden and figuring out what is the best way to ensure that my plants get the light that they need or the shade that they need. I'm also thinking in terms of, okay, suppose I have two plants that love light, but one is a big plant and one is a small plant. How can I plant them in such a way that the big plant won't block the sun from the smaller plant? So all of these are things that you can take into consideration when you are planning your garden. And this is why I say it is good to start your garden now for next year. So you're not going to be actually planting stuff now if you're in a season where you can't grow anything, but you are gardening in the sense that you're making all the preparations that you can now, because that is going to save you so much time next year. And that time that it saves you is going to also help you to extend your growing season. Okay, now let's look at the seventh mistake: not prepping your soil properly. And this is something that I have touched on in some of my previous videos, especially my garden prep videos that I've been doing since the fall began. Hi, May Homestead. How are you this morning? Yes, as you can see, we're discussing the top 14 gardening mistake that beginners make. And even some of us who are not beginners, because I must admit that sometimes I do make these mistakes, even though sometimes I may know better. Great tip on planning ahead. That worm farm, though. Congrats. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sian. Thank you, May. Okay, so yeah, so prepping your soil. Oh, hi, LP. Thank you for joining us this morning. Let's see. Happy have made part of this chat this time. Okay, yes. I'm glad you all could join me. I don't know if I missed anyone on the live. Oh, hi, getting clean on the prairies, Tracy. If I missed anyone, I apologize. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. I am no expert, not by a long shot, but I will share what little I know with you. Okay, so back to not prepping your soil properly. Plants, there are some plants that are finicky, and there are some plants that couldn't care less what you do with them. You plant them, you water them a few times, they're good to go. But all plants require some amount of nutrients, plants require moisture, they require light, they require so many little things. And so the nutrients, your soil, once you're planting, it's going to be depleting your soil. If it is a Soil that has not been used for a long time, it may be rich in nutrients because nothing has grown there. But if it was a soil that was being planted over a period of time and then it's not being used, it may have been depleted of nutrients, especially if you don't have organic matter falling from trees or stuff like that to replenish the soil. So you have to replenish your soil. You want to make sure that your soil is loose. And so you may amend your soil with things like compost, whether animal compost or plant compost, a combination of those, or with worm castings. But it is important to make sure that your soil is loose. Some of it, depending on what you're planting, needs to be well drained. Some of it needs to be able to retain a certain amount of moisture. Have to go, but I hope you're all still live when I get home. Blessings. Okay, take care, May. Thank you for joining. Okay, yes. So some soil, depending on what you're planting, is going to need to be loose and well drained and rich in nutrients. Some are going to be need to have sufficient amount of moisture because the plants that you're putting there is going to be moisture loving. So know what you're planting again, as I said before, and that is going to determine how you prepare your soil. It depends on what you are planting. Okay. Yeah, so it depends on what you are planting. If you have potting soil and you have been planting in it year after year, you need to amend your soil. And you can check out Han White's video on how she washed and sterilized her pots or flower pots to yes, sterilize her flower pots to make sure that whatever plant disease or pest might have been in that soil or in that pot, she gets rid of it for the next growing season. So these are things you have to sterilize your pots, you have to prepare the soil, you have to revitalize it if it's soil that you have been using it before. If you're a beginner, then naturally that would not be soil that you have been using before, but maybe someone else was using it, or maybe it is new soil. If it is new soil, then it is going to have enough nutrients in it to get your plants going for a while. Okay, here is another thing. Your plant, your pot size. What are you growing? What size pots are needed to grow this particular plant? If you have plants that send a lot of roots or they grow large, like your tomatoes and your peppers, then they're going to require larger containers. Small things like herbs, yes, those you can put in small containers. So know what you're planting and know the size pot that is required. Usually a 4 to 5 gallon pail will work well for things like tomatoes or peppers and stuff like that. So the size of your pots are going to be determined by what you are planting. And a good idea for those who are planning to be planting next year in containers, buy your containers now, because now a lot of places are going to be having sale. And when they're having sale because they want to put in new items in line with the season that you're in. So plan what you're going to plant now and try to get as many pots as you can now. Not to mention that because more persons are panicking about the pandemic and whether there's going to be food shortages, more people are going into gardening. So a lot of the things that would be readily available will not be available or won't be as available as much as before. So you want to get those things now. If you can recycle containers that you have in your home, by all means, please do so, because that is a good idea. You're saving money, you're saving yourself time to go out to get these things. And by using what you can at home, you're making what is out there on the market available for those who do not have something that they can use at home. Okay, I think that the mistake I made this year with that's a mistake I made this year with my sweet pepper. They didn't do well because they were crowded. Okay, and that is one of the points that I'm going to be discussing as well. Now, this was my first year back to gardening. I have three raised bed and about a handful of grow bags. I've been procrastinating prepping beds for winter because I want to build a hoop house for winter. Okay, that would be nice. And I'm a little unsure of prepping for winter, but I don't know what should be done with grow bags. Um, Not very familiar with grow bags, but from what I've seen on the internet, they seem to be somewhat of a, what is that now? A plastic cloth like material. Is that right, LP? Because if that's what it is, then you can just empty the soil out of it and pour some hot water on it to sterilize the bag. Or I wouldn't recommend putting it in bleach water if bleach is going to affect the color of the bag. But if not, then you can just use bleach water, rinse it in it, and that should be good enough. As for your soil, whether it is in grow bag or container, it's the same process. Empty out the soil that is in it. You can pour hot boiling water on the soil, and that will sterilize the soil. If you have things like, say, you have maybe a few worms that you have in there to help amend your soil, then you might not want to use the hot water to sterilize your soil. But you can, if you're not going to be sterilizing your soil, then you can just simply add your nutrients to it, mix it in. You don't want to just put the nutrients on the top. You want to mix it in because over time your soil can become compact in your grow bags. You will have things like the roots of the plants that have entangled the soil. So you want to take that out, break up the soil, and add as much nutrients. Usually the ratio is one part soil, one part compost. And if you're doing castings, compost, and soil, then it's a third of each. Some people dump them out. I was going to leave them. Yes. Okay. Very nice about the group house LB. Okay. Yes. They are black fabric. I was going to just leave them for the winter and grow in them next year. Do containers have to be emptied? Um, you can put your nutrients on the top of the container, but you're still going to have compacted material at the bottom, and you still may have roots that comes from the previous plants in there, and so you may or may not choose to empty it. If you're emptying it, that is better than just putting the compost on the top, because then you're getting all of the soil to be amended rather than just the top. um, so some of mine I have emptied, some I haven't yet, because a lot is required in emptying mine, because the containers that I grow in, I have it in a self-watering system. So because I have it in a self-watering system, I have 2 inches of gravel on the bottom before I have the drain holes 2 inches above the bottom of the container. So I will have to empty it in a way where I don't get the gravel mixed in with anything. So for those type, I do not throw them out. I just keep adding compost to the top of it. Okay, yes, containers need to be emptied and washed. I emptied my container and washed them. Okay. Um, you're welcome, Helpy. Right. So your size of your container matter, and you need to amend your soil as well. Now let's look at the ninth mistake, and this is not taking care of pests. When we are gardening, sometimes we may see pests. Sometimes we see insect on our plants. Some of them are good insects, some of them are bad. It is not easy to know which ones are good, which ones are bad, unless we know what that particular insect is and do a research on it to see whether or not it is good or bad. So some insects are good, they're going to be eating other insects, so they will be getting rid of pests for us. But we have to know the ones that are good and the ones that are bad. And when we find that we have the bad ones, don't wait until the population grows. Get rid of them as quickly as possible, because as I mentioned in my previous live, that pests, insect on a whole, they have memory of where they find food the last time they were able to find food. So you have to get rid of them as quickly as possible, because they will keep returning to that location and they're going to continue to decimate your soil. They're going to hide themselves in your soil over the winter as long as there is a means for them to do so. So you have to get rid of them as quickly as possible. Um, and don't just assume that because there are a few of them that it won't be a problem. It will become a problem with time, because it's just like human nature. If you look in the cities are overpopulated, and when you look outside the cities, it is not overpopulated. Why is that? That is because we can find work in the cities. We're more likely to find work in the cities. Food supplies, all of the little things that we need, or little gadgets, everything can be found in the cities. So people tend to gravitate to that area. It's a matter of survival. That is the same case with animals and insects. They are going to go where survival is most likely. So don't hesitate when you find yourself with pests. Get rid of them as quickly as possible. If you don't know what type of pests they are, you can always research them online. You can take pictures of them. You can put it on Facebook and ask the question, or things like that, and people will answer the question for you, or you can just put it simply on the internet. So find out what pest you're having and how you can deal with them and get rid of them as quickly as you can. Now, weed control is the next problem, that next mistake that beginners face. When you see weeds coming up in your garden, you have to get rid of it quickly. Why? A lot of them propagate very fast. Some of them, even if you see a few, they might be sending long roots under the bottom. You can't see the roots, and so you don't know that it is spreading, so you assume that there are a few of them. A lot of them grow seeds. If you allow them to reach the point where they seed up, then next garden season is going to be difficult for you, because you're going to be dealing with all of that new growth. So you have to take care of weeds as quickly as you see them coming up, especially for things that has lots of seeds, and things like grass that constantly sends its roots out. Weeds will overpopulate your garden, and it will take the nutrients that your plants need. And then you're going to have to be expending your resources to get more nutrients to give to the plants. And well, while you're doing that, the weeds that you're allowed to stay is still eating these new nutrients that you had. So you have to get rid of the weeds. You cannot allow it to stay there. One way that you can get rid of weed is, like, for example, you just finish harvesting everything from your garden. Covering your garden with a plastic that does not allow light to go through it, or with cardboard or paper, stuff like that, will help to kill weeds and grass. So that is one method that you can use to control weeds. You also want to uproot whatever weed you see as quickly as possible. So I would recommend, sometimes you're so busy that you don't have enough time to go through and weed your entire garden. Just before you water your garden, you can just go in, you choose a little spot, and you say, okay, today I am going to weed this area. Tomorrow you go in, you spend another 15 minutes. What happens, say you're at home and you have 15 minutes on hand that you're not doing anything, and you would just sit down and watch something on TV or so. Go in the garden and just pull out those weeds. It doesn't really take much out of us when we do it that way, and it doesn't become a burden to us as if we were to just sit down and pull weed all day. But if you have the time to do so, by all means, you can just spend a whole day and weed your garden, no problem. Mulching is another way that you can control weeds. Oh, thank you, and White. Mulching is another way that you can control weeds. So mulch around your plants as much as you can, but make sure that you're not putting the mulch directly against the stem of your plants, because that will trap too much moisture or it can encourage pests at the root of your plants. I had some old logs in my garden that I took the bark from, broke up and covered beds. I barely had to weed this year. Yes, that's a very good idea. Very good idea. Um, you said it's bark from some old trees, so you need to also be careful of carpenter ants, those wood termites, because they like old barks, old trees, so they can go in there and make a nest, and then they can take over your garden. So you have to be careful of that. So what you can do to control that, you can use diatomaceous earth in your garden, just sprinkle it in your garden, or you can use things like cornmeal in your garden wherever you have those barks. So this is one thing. In the process of trying to take care of one problem, sometimes we create another, and there is nothing we can do to prevent these problems from occurring. So we are always have to be trying to stay one step ahead. So when you, for example, companion planting with a view to get rid of a particular pest, might get rid of that pest but invite another one, but you still have to do your companion planting, or if not, that pest is going to disturb your plants. So we always have to try to stay one step ahead and find out, okay, what can go wrong if I do this, and always be making a counteraction for that. I also planted densely, which resulted in poor pepper production because cherry tomatoes block them. Oh, thank you, White Davy. Great point. Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay, now let's move on to the 11th mistake, which is planting out of season. We know that there are some plants that you can plant year round. There are some plants that you can plant only a particular time of the year. Um, so if we find that we have plants that we can grow year round, fine, go ahead, plant it whenever. Plants that are seasonal, they are dependent on the weather, stuff like that. You have to know what time they do best. Are they gonna do better in the earlier part of spring, in summer, or in fall? Know these things and plant accordingly, because you're planting because you want to get the most out of it, right? You're not planting just to say you plant. So you're planting to reap the benefit, whether it is flowers and you want to see the blooms, or it is food that you want to harvest for your family. We're planting because we want to see the final result. So know the season that each plant that you're going to be growing requires, and grow in that season. If you're planting late, to the extent where you might not harvest from it or reap the benefit, then don't it doesn't make sense. If you have a cool weather plant and you're planting it in the middle of summer, you're going to have problems. The chances of you harvesting is very, very low, and you're going to have to take on some additional work to ensure that you have a cooler environment for those plants. So if you're prepared to do the extra work, then fine, but if not, try to plant things in season. I have made this mistake for sure. My beet started in the summer, grow through, grown through a very hot July, did not grow well, and were extremely bitter, indelible. Oh, I've been told it was likely due to heat. Okay, so see, I just learned something from you, because I grew beet this year for the first time, but I didn't really know that it rather the cooler environment. Well, it was planted on the south side of the property, which was cooler, but it was still in the summer when it was hot. So, yeah, I didn't know that it required cooler environments. Thanks for that. Yes, so we have to try to plant things according to the season that it requires. And the 12 mistake that beginners make is not having a plan for their garden. When you don't have a plan for your garden, a few things can go wrong. Overplanting, planting things wherever, and then you will end up with tall plants, short plants, all cumbled up together, and then some is going to be struggling to get sunlight, some is going to be hugging all of the sunlight. Things are going to be so close that they don't have enough space, they don't have enough nutrients, they don't have enough light. So you have to plan your garden, know what you want to plant, um, what are their requirements, how tall do they grow, how short do they stay. um, if I put this here, will it affect that plant negatively? Will it be positive? Um, but that's not the only issue. There are many plants that can grow together. Your tomatoes can grow with things like your carrots, with lettuce, stuff like that. Your corn can grow with beans and peas, with pumpkins, with cucumbers. So you have to know what plants you can put together to maximize what you can get from your garden while using as little space as possible. So you have to plan your garden. As I mentioned before, your nutrients, the environment, the condition that your plants need. Similar needs, plants with similar needs are to be put together. Um, so plants with similar needs need to be put together. So you have to spend the time, plan your garden, know what you want to plant and their needs. That is going to help you to have a very productive garden. So don't be afraid to plan ahead. We have a few months before the growing season starts. Some of us may have a long time. I know I have 6 months before my growing season starts. Oh, nah. I have 7 months before my growing season start unless I'm starting indoors. Some persons might have maybe 3 months or 4 months before their growing season start. So now you have a few months. Use that time to plan your garden, what you want to plant and everything. Just visualize your garden, or if you can't visualize it, go out in the garden, look at your garden, look at the space that you have. Do you want to do container gardening? Do you want to do raised bed gardening? Do you want to plant in the ground? Do you want to do vertical gardening? Do you want to do hydroponics? Do you want to do the Kratky method? Think about these things and then plan your garden accordingly. Go out and get the seeds that you want. Think about the nutrients that your garden is going to need. So always be planning what you can do for your garden from now. That is going to be so beneficial to you. When you see the result the following year, you're going to be so surprised. And you have to keep notes, my friends. You have to keep notes of what you are doing. So sometimes we might have ideas and we say, okay, we're going to do this, and we don't write it down. But guess what? We quickly forget because we're so preoccupied with the other things in life that we forget about it. So you have to keep notes, you have to keep a record of what you plan to do. You can always go back and change your plans, but at least you have that note so you can go back to it, look at it, and see what it is that you had planned, what you can do different, how you can improve on that plan. So you have to keep notes, plan your garden properly. Now, here is another point that we have touched on, which is a mistake that a lot of beginners make, and that is not thinning out their seedlings. So, as I mentioned before, each type of plant have a particular amount of space that they require. If you have all your seedlings bundled up in a particular location, they're going to be struggling for nutrients. That is definitely so. They're going to be struggling for space. Two, because they don't have sufficient space and they're struggling for nutrients, what is going to happen is that your produce is going to be a whole lot smaller. The taste even is going to be affected because it doesn't have the nutrients to bring out that flavor that is required. So you have to thin your seedling to make sure that they have sufficient space. I must apologize again for those of you who did not hear before, but My winery is under construction. I'm supposed to be there helping my husband with that, but this is work for me, and if it is work, I'm not willing to give up work to go and do that. So I'll get back to it after I'm finished with my life. Oh, hi, Pandemic Greenhouse. I made a device to save space, water, and nutrients. I made a DIY video. Nice. Um, I'm just gonna jot that down so that I can go and check that out. Pandemic Greenhouse. Um, Pandemic, what is the name of that video you're talking about? If you need any advice, let me know. It is very easy to make. You shouldn't have a problem. Yes, and if you have seen any of my previous videos, you know that I am a hands-on person. I'm always building stuff, so things like that I'd be happy to check out. Okay, right. So we were looking at thinning out our seedlings for nutrients purposes and for space required, and to make sure that we get the most out of our garden. We need to thin our crops. If you could have 100 little tiny carrots, or you could have 50 nice, large, juicy carrots, which one would you go for? The 100 tiny little carrots that are not as flavorful as the 50 nice, big, juicy carrots. So spend the time to thin out. Yes, I know for me, I hate to see plants dying. So when I have to thin out plants, it really grieves my heart. I'm not going to lie. It grieves my heart, but it is necessary. And so, what I do to ensure that I am not killing a lot of plants, um, I plant my seeds close, but not too close where I have to destroy too much of them. But then, if you know that you're growing something that is easy to die, then you want to sow as many seeds as possible to make sure that you have the amount of plants that you need to grow. Oh, you're back, LP. That's good. Uh, okay. Someone called you. Sour Ponics. Sour Ponic. I have made many videos on it and I came up with it a month ago. Sour Ponic. Okay, yes. So that's it about thinning your seedlings. Now, here's a question for you. What is the biggest gardening mistake you've ever made? Let's see. What is my biggest gardening mistake that I've ever made? LP says, I feel sad thinning too. I wound up growing too many tomatoes because I had extra seedlings. I've heard you can transplant turnip when when you think when you thin them. Okay. Yes. I've never grown turnip, but guess what? People say you cannot transplant carrots. I transplant carrots and they have done pretty well. So this is how I thin my carrots. I don't go and cut them out. I pull them out and I transplant them somewhere else in to space them out. That is how I thin most of my things that I thin. That is how I thin them. I don't pull them out and discard them. I pull them out and put them somewhere else. Uh, Sometimes some of them will die, but for the most part, I would say I've had at least 50% success rate in transplanting my in thinning my carrots and transplanting them. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I thin them and transplant them and it works. I have about 50% success rate with that. Okay, so back to the question, what is the biggest gardening mistake you've made? My biggest gardening mistake would be this year with my cruciferous plants, my cabbage and lettuce, broccolis and stuff like that. Not familiar with growing kales and broccolis and the Chinese cabbage. So I planted all of those in the same location. I didn't know that doing that invites pests, and also I did not interplant other crops between it that would help to keep down the pest, and so my plants were decimated this year. I did get a nice harvest from the kale and the yeah, from the kales, but the cabbage, oh, they didn't do well at all. I think I got less than 25%. I was able to harvest less than 25% of the Chinese cabbage and the broccolis. Well, my broccolis bolted, but I think that was my biggest mistake. I did not interplant, so I end up losing most of my cruciferous plants. My garden was too overcrowded, says Ann White. So that's my biggest mistake so far. LP says one of my biggest mistakes this year was not inspecting the stem of the squash plants for squash borers. I have been hearing about the squash borers a lot this year. And I'm going to have to look into that because I don't know what they are, but I have seen a video on the damage that they do. So I'm going to have to look into that because I plan to grow a bit of squash this year. And White says, well, I did that also, but with mixed results. Like yours, my pepper plants did not do well for that reason. Okay. All right. Next question. Why do you do gardening? Do you do it for fun? Do you do it for food? Is it a combination of these? And in the meantime, we're going to be discussing the 14th gardening mistake that beginners and myself make. Sorry, LP, as it's not a good feeling. Yeah, I agree that it's really not a good feeling. I assume they had some kind of blight and that the symptoms were not borer-like. After spraying for blight, I picked up the stem and it broke apart in my hand to reveal a big white grub. Oh, yeah. I was watching this video sometime late spring with this guy. I don't remember who it was who was showing. Uh, he had this borer and he showed how you can get rid of it. And he says once you notice that little dark brown spot on the stem of your plant, I don't remember where exactly on the stem of the plant they like to go through, but he says once you notice that little brown hole in our brown spot in the stem, you take a knife and you slit that spot and take out that bug because it will lay its egg in there and it will decimate your plant. Um, yeah, I'm going to have to look into that because I'm going to be growing a lot of squash this year. Okay, and White says it is relaxing, so that's why you garden. Yes, that for me that is the main reason why I do gardening. It is very relaxing. When if I'm feeling stressed in any way, I just go out and do some gardening or just sit down in the garden, talk to my plants, play with my plants, and I'm good to go. So it is relaxing. Yes, I also do it for the food, but I enjoy the gardening more for the relaxation than for the produce. All right, but we learn, right? And that for that we are better gardeners. Yep. Everything about life and gardening is a learning process, and you can never know enough because things change, time change. So gardening is always changing. We're always trying to find new methods to increase um or improve our gardening and our production. So yeah, it's always a learning process, but it is a fun one. White Davy, both squash plants died very quickly. Oh wow, gosh, never mind. They had so many little squash and were huge plants. Wow. I think I saw that video. It was Gary Pilarchik at the Rusted Garden. The name does not sound familiar, but the person that the video that I watched, it was someone I was not accustomed to. So I don't know if it was that guy. It's not someone I was accustomed to following. I just saw the headline, the topic, and decided to watch it because it seemed interesting. Mhm. I garden because I love growing plants. Watching them grow from seeds to flowers. Harvesting my own food is so fabulous too. Yes, I totally agree with that. Sorry, I always have allergies in my eyes, so I tend to rub them, which is costing me my eyesight. Um, yes, I love watching the seeds. Whenever I sow any seeds, I just sit and I go back. I can go like day after day and just look, are they germinating yet? And when I see them germinating, I am so happy. Oh yes, they are growing. And then I watch to see how fast will they grow. Um, I baby them. Oh, Harnev, you're back. Yes. So we just went through the 9 mistake that beginner gardeners make. So I'm just gonna run back over them again. LP says, yes, I love to nerd out on my plants. Yes. All right. So we looked at the 14, the more popular 14 mistake that beginner gardeners make, and even some of us who have been gardening for a while still tend to make some of these mistakes sometimes. And another extra mistake that we like to make is handling the plants a lot. We like to touch them, and when they're in their baby state, we should try our best to avoid touching them as often as we sometimes do. Harnab says, I am growing spinach, mustard, fenugreek, peas, cauliflower, and tomato. Um, I'm not familiar with what fenugreek is. That fenugreek peas or fenugreek alone by itself? Okay. So those 14 mistake is starting too big as a beginner because it is a lot to handle when you're a beginner. There's a lot that you need to learn. So struggling to learn about a lot of things all at once can be a bit tiring. We looked at planting too deep or too shallow. Remember the rule of the thumb when you're planting seeds is that the thickness of your seeds you're going to plant, that's how deep you plant your seeds. Um, Overwatering or underwatering, and overwatering your seeds or your seedlings can result in fungus knots. If you're growing in trays, one of a good way that you can water your plants so that you can reduce fungus knot is to water the catchment tray below and let the soil wicks the water from the catchment tray. That way you don't have water or moisture on the surface of your soil, and that will reduce the fungus knots that likes to grow on your plants, and sometimes they will kill your plants. Okay, let's see. Over fertilizing or under fertilizing is the fourth one. Planting too close, which encourages mildew. Light requirements, not preparing your soil properly, adding sufficient nutrients, etc. Not using the right size container for the size plant that you have. not taking care of pests, not weeding your garden frequently, planting out of season, not planning for your garden, not thinning your seedlings. And the 14th one that I haven't discussed yet is not labeling your plants. Even if you are a mature gardener, you still need to label your plants. Why is that? Because one, if you're planting two varieties of tomatoes, you may not be able to look at them and identify which is which. And sometimes you may want to know which one you planted where. So it is important to label your plants, and I am guilty of this one. I am very guilty of this one, of not labeling my plant. And I tell myself, okay, I know that I plant that there, and I know that I plant that there, and I know that I plant that there. For example, when I was doing my cruciferous plants, my broccoli, my pak choi, my Chinese cabbage, my kales, all of them were planted. Like, say I have one row of one here, one row of the other there, one row of the other there. But guess what? In the seedling stage, they all look the same. So I quickly forget what was planted where. I had to wait until the plants reach a certain height where they grow their true leaves. Then I was able to say, okay, so that's what that was. So it is important to label your stuff, and especially if you're a beginner, because you may not be familiar with what a particular plant look like. So labeling it, you know what is planted where, you know what care to give it in that young stage, because you know what that plant is. Radish. I am also growing radish. If you're, I don't know if Arnav is asking where I am from, but I am from Saskatchewan in Canada. And White says she doesn't label either. I didn't take care of cabbage worms and loopers on my broccoli, and they wrecked it. I only grew one because my seedlings did not get enough light inside, so only one grew well outside. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I will next year if it is God's will. Yeah, I intend to label next year because I intend to extend my garden in terms of what I am planting. I didn't label my melons this year, and I had hammy melon, I had baby melon, this sweet baby melon. I had another type of melon, not sure what it was, and the three of them looked the same, and I didn't know which was which. So I'm going to be labeling my stuff next year. In fact, this is something that you can do now. If you know what it is that you're planning to plant, you can create your label from now so that you don't have to be doing that next year. So I'm always thinking every time I get an idea, okay, I'm going to be doing this now so that I don't have to spend the time to do that next year. As for what I'll be growing next year, I want to be growing several members of the melon family, and I'm going to be doing members of the cruciferous plants. I'm going to be doing corns. I want to be doing kidney beans. I want to do peas and beans. I'm going definitely carrots, tomatoes, lettuce, those every year. Those are a must. Even if I don't plant anything else, my carrots and my tomatoes are always there, and my cucumbers. So I'm gonna be having my carrots, my cucumbers, my I'm gonna be growing more varieties of lettuce this year. There's some varieties that get bitter very quickly. I don't like those. I hope I don't get any of those in my seeds. Um, yeah, I'm going to be growing quite a few. I'm going to be growing squash. So I have quite a few things, and I'm going to be growing more flowers this year because it is going to increase pollination and it is going to attract some of the beneficial insects that helps to control pests and stuff like that. So I'm going to be growing more flowers. I've ordered some seeds already, and according to the update, it says that it has been shipped. They didn't say when I'm going to be getting those, so I'm waiting on those seeds. I'm going to be growing peppers as well. Okay, LP says my garden is small enough and I am a nerd that I try to remember what the plant leaves look like, so then I remember them based on leaf identification. Now, should I grow different varieties? Trouble. Arnav, bottle gourd, round gourd, ridge gourd, pumpkin, cup pipe, pumpkin. Nice. Hold on, I think I missed something. Gardener Scott has a video about painting rocks with your kids to use as label in the garden. Oh, that's a nice idea. It's a very nice idea. Gardener Scott. I think I've heard of that person, but I don't think I follow that person. I'm gonna drop that down. Gardener Scott. Okay. And I'm a bit over an hour. I'm going to ask the final question on this live. Anthony, please close that door. What do you hate most about gardening? And after this question, we are going to be closing down the live. In the meantime, while I wait on your answers, I am just gonna be giving a bit of a reminder for those who are new to my live and you might be thinking of checking out each other's channel. Please go ahead and do so, but do not leave any spamming comments. So things like I joined you, new friend here, stay connected, I sub to you, your turn, stuff like that is considered spam by YouTube. And if you subscribe to someone and leave comments like that, YouTube is going to take your subscription away. So be kind to each other and don't leave these spamming comments on each other's channel. Okay. LP. Arnav, we're all in fall now, heading into winter. We've got some warmer, sunny weather this week, 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise, we get snow and sometimes down below 0 Fahrenheit. Here, temperature is cold in North India. Oh, well, so I must say this week has not been too bad. It is almost another record-breaking weather. We have yesterday the temperature went up to 16 degrees Celsius, and that is unusual for November, even for October, because October we usually go into minus temperatures. It can go down into the minus 20s at this time of year, but our temperature is 16 degrees Celsius. So, and today I think is going to be a little bit higher than that, so it's pretty good. LP says Gardener Scott is in Colorado and has been gardening for over 30 plus years. Nice. When I planted something, they didn't germinate nor bear anything. And LP says my season Arnav is March through September. Wow, long. October really. It snows recently, but my kale, pak choy, beets, carrots, and radish are still alive. Oh, that's so nice. Uh, it doesn't snow here. Oh my goodness, aren't you ever fortunate? I'm jealous. I say I planted seeds for greens a month ago. Sure, they do good, but very few germinated. Completely dry by November. Oh, for me, our growing season is from the last week in May to um, sometimes in September. After that, um, and sometimes it doesn't last, the growing season doesn't last that long because even though the last week in May is when we have the last frost, sometimes it is still too cold for you to do much. So, and sometimes you have to have your crop out of the ground by August because September, early September, you can get snow. This year is the only September in the last 4 years that we haven't had snow. So yeah, so we have 3 to 4 months of growing season here. Okay, so I think that is the end of this live. Thank you guys for participating, and I will see you again on Friday for another live. I am not so sure what the topic will be just yet. I probably exaggerated our growing season a lot. Our main season is May through September, but we can start cool weather crop in March in a good year. Yeah, I guess we start our crop sometimes depending on what it is. March, like the second week in March to sometime in first week in April we start doing our growing indoors. Great life. Oh, thank you, Han. Oh, I didn't answer the question that I asked you. What I hate most about gardening. What I hate most about gardening is weeds and when I plant and they just come to nothing. LP says, yes, this was great. Oh, thank you, LP. Bad bugs. Ah, yeah, so that is it. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again on Friday, all being well. Stay safe and have a lovely day. You too, and White. Election day. Hush. All right, I'm signing out now.